I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar, Increasing Productivity and Margins in an Era of Forced Change, which is sponsored by cloud storage and collaboration provider, platform provider, Ignite. I'm Thomas Lane, the technical editor of Building. Managing all the data needed to deliver a successful construction project is a challenge at the best of times. Digital technology has the potential to make this much easier, yet many industry firms have yet to embrace these benefits. The pandemic has made remote working the norm for many, but for some companies has been the catalyst to change to a more digitally enabled working environment. But other people still have lingering doubts about the benefits that digital offers. Today we will hear how Belgian contracting giant Aertsen has leveraged Ignite as their common data environment to keep those in the office and out in the field up to speed with essential information, regardless of location or zone. In this webinar, you will learn how Ignite became the company standard at Aertsen, best practices when using a common data environment, keeping data safe without impacting on productivity, and how scalability is key in implementing a common data environment. So today I'm joined by Carol Filion, who is the construction technology marketing consultant at Ignite, and Vincent Corneliusens, the ICT Global Operations Manager for Aertsen Group. So the format of today's session will be Carol and Vincent will present for about 50 minutes, and we will take your questions in the remaining time. There's a box in your screen and you can type your questions during the presentation or afterwards, and then we'll endeavour to take as many of those as possible. So for now, I'd like to hand over to Carol and Vincent. Thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Carol Filion, and I am a construction technology marketing consultant. Today, I will be presenting with Mr. Vincent Corneliusens of Aertsen Group. Vincent is an IT entrepreneur with 20 years of experience in the industry and currently on contract for Aertsen Group as ICT Global Operations Manager. He's also the founder of PC Today, a company that specializes in managed IT services for businesses, and is also the co-founder of Pure Dynamics, specializing in IT services for the music and entertainment industry. As for my background, I've spent 15 years working in construction software in various capacities. My involvement has ranged from technical and educational communications to product marketing, that is, providing the interpretation and translation between product management and industry end users. In these roles, and as managing editor of an industry newsletter for electrical and mechanical contractors, I've seen firsthand the various construction processes, pain points that the right technology can address to help businesses become more efficient and profitable. So this is why I'm especially excited about the discussion I'm about to have with Vincent. So over the next 35 minutes or so, Vincent and I will define what a common data environment is and why this is an important cornerstone for your construction business. Then we'll jump right in and we'll discuss some of the facts and misconceptions around keeping construction data in the cloud and dealing with the cloud in general. In light of the past several months now, the cloud has now become an all-important piece in keeping businesses running remotely. So we felt it was important to clear up some of the myths and hopefully give you some peace of mind as you continue to grow your business. And more importantly, we'll see how Vincent implemented Ignite as Aertsen's CDE, or Common Data Environment, to streamline their processes, improving productivity and keeping remote locations connected and engaged throughout this pandemic. Having said all of that, let me hand it over to Vincent, who will give us an overview of Aertsen Group. Vincent?
Thank you, Carol. Hello, everyone, and welcome. First of all, I'd like to introduce the company that I am working for today, which is the Aertsen Group, founded in 1959 in Belgium. This is a family enterprise. and still today, the capital is completely privately held by the family of Artsen. The Artsen Group is actually a number of different companies that are active in a number of different construction-related verticals. The most important verticals that we are working in are earth moving, road construction, demolition, soil remediation, and brownfield development. Other business units also include crane rental, and we are also active in the mining industry. We have a number of different ways of transporting heavy goods and oversized items. Think about windmills, assembly of those, and transportation of those via the road, over the water, via rail. And last but not least, we also work for manufacturers such as Hyundai or Caterpillar, JLG, and others, where we offer them fulfillment services, logistical services for getting their product to their end user clients. Over the last decade, the group has expanded internationally and has been completing projects all over the globe. And currently, the group employs about 1,500 people worldwide. We have offices, our main office is in Belgium. We have offices in Cyprus and in the Middle East. We are also expanding into UAE and Qatar a couple of years ago, and very recently also Oman. Other than those locations in the Middle East, we also have a fairly large number of international projects going on in Africa, India, and many different countries actually. Just to give you an idea of the size of the company, we've listed last year's revenue, which was 180 million euros, so that would be close to $200 million.
All right, let me jump in here and tell you a little bit about Ignite. So let's have a look at some of the hard facts around Ignite. The company was founded 13 years ago and has attracted big name investors such as Google Ventures and most recently Goldman Sachs. Ignite now has over 750 employees distributed globally, 3 offices in the US, 1 in the UK, and 1 in Poland. And they currently serve over 16,000 customers, of which 2,500 are in the construction sector. Ignite currently boasts annual revenues of around $100 million annually. So before we jump right into the presentation, there are some questions I have for the audience. What I'd like you to do is to please give some thought to how you're dealing with your data now. Specifically, are you experiencing issues around accessibility? Are you dealing with large files in the office and on site? Do you have security concerns around your data? And are you concerned about costs and perhaps a perceived lack of ROI? So these are some of the things that we'd like to discuss in the next 35 minutes or so. But if you can think of any of these concerns now, go ahead and share your pain points with us in the chat box, and we'll try to address as many as we can at the end of the session. All right, so let's get started. A number of years ago, a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why. And in it, he describes that if individuals and or organizations can and get a fix on why they do what they do, then everything just flows from there. That at the end of the day, people don't invest in what you do, they invest in why you do it. So that brings us to Ignite's core beliefs. Our focus has always been, will always be making sure that you have the right content in your hands so that you can grow your business and by extension, improve the world around you. So if we stop and think about that statement for a moment and we consider that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, then the inverse is true, that content in the wrong hands can have an immensely negative impact. Ignite is on a mission to provide tight security in the cloud while providing an accessible and flexible collaboration platform that's designed to empower you and your team. Okay, so we're going to be describing and defining what a common data environment is, or a CDE. And when we speak of construction data in the cloud, There are a number of software packages that offer this. Now, the problem is that they keep the data in its own silo, which can then make it very difficult to manage from a security standpoint with a clear audit history to accessibility to making sure that the latest content is available to all project stakeholders. So a common data environment, or CDE, as I said, keeps and protects all that content in a single secure repository in the cloud. So what's the purpose of a CDE? Well, it really isn't just another file repository. Instead, what it does is it enables your team to collaborate easily and seamlessly. And with the right integrations to popular construction software, data silos can be eliminated. That is, you can avoid duplication and the potential for errors. And this is something that Vincent and I will be talking about in a bit. So by extension, that makes sure that only the latest information is available. So not only does that help increase productivity, it can also mitigate rework, saving time and money, all that while providing a clear audit history of all the data movement. So who's opened what and what was downloaded. So having said all of that, Ignite really is the perfect example of a CDE. As you can see from the graphic here, you have all of these large files typically used in construction that are all pointing to one central repository. In this case, that is Ignite. But the graphic really just shows you what a cloud-only scenario is, where, yeah, you might be able to connect to the documents in the cloud with your mobile device and so on and so forth. But really, what Ignite is, it is a cloud-first CDE. So from a rudimentary standpoint, yes, this graphic demonstrates how all these file types can live and work within a single source of truth. But what sets Ignite apart is that we also have a unique hybrid technology that construction companies in particular have adopted to solve a lot of their accessibility pain points. And what I mean by hybrid is this is where you're leveraging the cloud with a physical appliance. So although these files can be quite large, they can be accessed quite quickly, especially in a hybrid environment. So we'll get into some more detail as Vincent and I debunk some of the myths around construction data in the cloud and how this applied directly to Artson. So Vincent, I'm going to hand off to you so you can tell a little bit about the Artson story and what pain points brought you to Ignite.
Thank you, Carol. About 3 years ago, I found myself on a project site, literally in the middle of the ocean in the Maldives, where we were building artificial islands for our clients. And luckily enough, we did have internet access. We had 3G internet connections, a bunch of them. But, well, it is quite challenging to keep a VPN connection open and stable so that you can access a file server back home in Belgium, all the way from the Maldives. Large files are really hard to transfer back home without having to start over and over again. So that was really problematic, and that's where our search actually started for what was called at the time an EFSS, an enterprise file sharing system, which what we call now CDE these days. Most people will resort to email when they find themselves in such a situation. They will try to send attachments out via their mailbox. But some of these files, they are simply too big to attach to an email, right? So, for instance, for our survey team, they have to make a daily survey of the site of the island, and they use drones for that. So people were generating large files, say 1 or 2 gigabyte of footage in one file, which you can't really compress further. So that was really difficult to get it out of there. So people would do the craziest things, you know. They would ship out USB sticks, they would share photos with the main office via Facebook, which actually scatters all your data across all these different applications and mailboxes and different locations and such. But at the end of the day, you still need a PC to be able to get to those files when they are on the server of the main company, right? So what happens is people would not update, would not upload their files. They would keep them on their laptops. Laptops would break down or go missing. The correct version of the file would get overwritten by an old version. Granting and revoking permissions, tracking what people do with their files is also a nightmare in such a scenario. It's already difficult enough in a regular office scenario where you have a classic file server. So that's really when we felt the need to shift away from these ad hoc solutions or fixes that we would have to apply when working on remote sites. So the main goal, except for being able to access files and share files, etc., was also to structure this IT situation better for the future, because projects will become more numerous, projects will become larger, more people are involved, more people need access. And of course, on top of all of this, you also need to stay compliant with all the different governance and rules and requirements, regulations that you are working under as a company. So that is basically where our search started for a hybrid cloud file sharing or storage system.
So that was quite the laundry list that you had. And when I looked at this initially, Vincent, I got to say that there had to be a lot of myths and misconceptions. So that's why we decided that for the sake of this presentation, that what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into 4 categories of myths that you busted and were able to implement in a very practical way for Artesyn Group. So the 4 categories that we'll be looking at coming up are accessibility, working with large files, security, and cost and ROI. All right. So we start with the myth busting. So the first category is accessibility. So one of the things, Vincent, that you had to deal with was they seem to think that VPN and email and file servers were the only way to go in remote locations. How did that?
Yeah, because these are like those are like the classic go-to solutions, right? Everybody knows about a file server or multiple file servers. There are many products also out there these days that can offer file server-alike functionality, but cloud-based. So we actually tried a different solution first, which didn't work. We were experiencing a number of stability issues with files not getting updated quick enough, and that solution was actually piggybacking onto our existing Windows file server infrastructure. We ended up shortlisting Ignite alongside a few other competitors, and in the end, one of the main reasons why we decided to go for Ignite was the fact that they were the only contender that offered a truly hybrid solution, where you can have the combination of people working in offices with a decent internet connection or connecting to their file servers over their local network, combined with many users outside of the main office, regardless where they are located, connecting to the same set of data in the cloud. So your cloud storage repository is your single source of truth, and everybody's working on the same data. And that was a very big win for us in our project setup.
Excellent. And that's really working internally and then externally too, if I understood correctly, that you were able to send download links. So rather than attaching these large files to emails and sending it out to 20, 30 people and repeating and then you chewing up that bandwidth, you were able to send out just a link where everybody was pointed to the same area and they were able to download the document that they needed. If I understood that
that's
correctly,
correct,
right? Yeah.
We were sending out so many versions of the same file, iterations of the same file, basically, through email that nobody knew A, which is the correct version at present time, which is the most recent version, and B, everybody had to upload the files because they go out through email, and then they had to download them all again. So at the end of the day, you'd have 10 different files in your mailbox, and that was just a waste of bandwidth. So if you can share it via a link, and that link is always pointing to the most recent version of the same file, that eliminates the need of distributing updates of that file. So you don't have to physically send any data around anymore. You just stick to one link, and everybody can just collaborate in the same place.
Right. And actually, if I can add to that too, although I don't think that you were taking advantage of this, but there's also the ability to send upload links where you're sending a link where people can drag and drop their own documents. So if somebody's doing whatever, they're collecting bids in a particular folder, then those upload links do the opposite. Essentially, they receive the information and then able to do it securely. Okay, so the next one was you can only get documents to sites using external drives. So this is essentially an extension of what we were just talking about, where not only the download links, but you're also able to get mobile access, correct?
Yes. So one of the things that we need to do a lot is we need to submit information back to the main office. Could be an inspection report of a machine that has broken down, which will include a number of photos, which might include part numbers, a little site report, things like that. It could be ordering new safety equipment, or it could be, requesting a leave day through standardized company issued forms. The main vehicle used to transport these back and forth, because of the limited internet bandwidth on a site, would be a USB thumb drive or an external hard drive, or again having to send it in via email. But then you create a manual action on the other end where the person has to receive the USB thumb drive or save the attachment, like take it off of the email, save it on the right folder on the server, etc., etc. So if you were to be able to enter this data directly into, say, a spreadsheet on your mobile phone, given the fact that we had 3G in the Maldives, usually we have 4G. Sometimes we work with a satellite uplink. It varies a bit on the market that we're working in, the country that we're working in. But if you have some form of connectivity without having to send a lot of data back and forth, you can very easily, through the mobile app, update a file. It is a massive difference compared to having to take out your laptop, create a file, email it, send it over, and then all the manual steps that have to occur on the other side as well.
Right. Okay, so the next myth then that you also had to bust was that data can't be moved around without a measure of risk. But then what you were experiencing then were some data silos because of that, right? And accidental deletions and so on.
Yeah, like I briefly mentioned before, people would simply lose their laptop, or it would break down, the hard drive would break down. People would accidentally delete files, or they would save the wrong version of the file, like say an old version that erases updates that somebody else has done to that file. So if you don't have a single source of truth, it by definition means that you are creating separate silos, and they can be on separate computers, or they can be on different platforms. And the versioning aspect of a CDE is a very valuable asset in such scenarios where you can keep track of who updated which file, when, who deleted the file, what time was it deleted, was it accidentally moved or removed. In a classic file server situation, it is very painful to start tracking that type of changes. Where did the file go? How can we restore it? How can we retrieve it? How do we restore the latest or the correct version of it? When you have a CDE like Ignite, it is literally 2 clicks and nothing. It's like nothing happened. You're just back on track right away.
Right. And the thing with the CDE too, I mean, the data already live in a single, accessible, secure repository, so you don't really have to move it. So we're already accessing the information from any device, any location, just like you mentioned, and we're either doing it on our laptops or our mobile devices. So there's no real need to move the data at all. So that removes the risk, as you've pointed out. I just, before we move on to the next slide, I just have one last word here on the accessibility. And in a recent study on data governance trends that Ignite commissioned and that Wakefield Research conducted, out of 400 C-suite IT executives that were surveyed, 97% said that existing approaches to digital file management created major issues. And almost half, 47%, said that employees have access to files they should not, while 40% don't have access to the files that they should. All right, large files. This was something that you had to deal with, correct, Vincent? So myth number one, now
Absolutely.
CDE is just for large files. Is it just for large files?
It's for any type of file, really. The file size is not really relevant. I mean, there are obviously always certain limitations on the file size. Let's be clear on that, but they are way beyond what most companies are looking for, I'm sure. We would actually move Office type files the most, Excel files, Word files, PowerPoint presentations and such, PDF files, scanned documents, photos. Very, very big feature of the mobile app is that you can take photos and have them upload in the background. So if you need to shoot, say, a set of 10 different pictures of a machine that has broken down, before we had to make the photos with a digital camera, go to the office, plug in the SD card, copy to the laptop, send them out via email or Facebook or whatever, etc., etc. Now you just whip out your cell phone, you make the photos through the Ignite mobile app, so it has a built-in capability of making the photos and uploading them in the background. As you are making more photos, the previous photos, they keep uploading automatically. So that's a really cool feature that's very, very useful for us. And obviously our drone footage, if one person uploads it and then sends a link around so that only the people that actually need to look at the footage are going to download the footage, instead of doing all these other crazy things to distribute that footage. That was also a blessing for our mobile data usage and the cost associated with that.
Right, right. So I've kind of skipped over to the next one because you were kind of answering that question that the only way to move large files is with physical hard drives, which obviously is not the case. So you were saying that you're able to do it with mobile devices, taking the photos and maybe the drone images or whatever. But you can also, you were working with connected folders as well. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. We heavily make use of that feature.
Right. And I know that there are some stories that I've heard of others where they've been able to take, even if they were in a low or slow bandwidth area, that they would collect the information on the device that they were, let's say if there was a scanner and they were scanning directly to a laptop with a souped up hard drive on it, and that once they were within connection, when they were within range, then because of this connected folders feature, then boom, they were just able to connect directly to or sync back to the cloud and have everything back into the head office. Is this similar to what you had experienced?
Depending on exactly how the project site is structured and the number of office workers we have on a project site, we can take different approaches. When we have an actual footprint of an actual office, it will still be in the field. So imagine you have container offices, like a temporary office setup, where we would only have access to 3G or 4G internet connections. We would go ahead and bundle a number of those 3G or 4G connections with some specialized routers, so we can aggregate the bandwidth of several SIM cards. creating a slightly larger pipe to the internet. And then we would deploy a local server in that office, so that every user, say this is ideal for like 10, 20 people or more, every user would connect over the local network to that local Ignite server, and any changes that either come in or go out would only come in or go out once over the internet line, because the Ignite repository, the Ignite local cloud, the ELC, will handle all the uploading and downloading and updating of all the files that are being changed. So that is the perfect solution for us, where we have a fairly large number of people working in a temporary office situation, and we still have to move big files or a lot of files. There's a lot of collaboration going on with the project sites, with the main offices, etc. But there's a very limited amount of internet bandwidth available.
Right. Right. And that essentially answered the last myth that you can't work in low or slow bandwidth areas. And obviously that isn't the case. And you were able to do it in a very practical way and in a very real way using the hybrid technology that I described earlier. All right. So when we were talking about cloud security, how did they feel about, being able to keep your data safe in the cloud? I think you shared a story about a previous contract that you'd had that was using Ignite, actually, and had a situation where a folder had disappeared.
Yeah. Well, first of to address the myth directly, when people think that there's no real way to keep your data safe in the cloud, it has mostly to do, I believe, with the fact that you cannot grab the data, that you don't have a physical appliance that you can touch, and that this is where my data is, this is where my backups go, etc. Now, once you get over that first fear, and you give a hybrid technology like Ignite a try, you will see that you can actually have it both ways. But we will talk about that, I believe, in a later slide. So the story that you're referring to, Carol, is basically the CEO of another client of mine. They are also using Ignite, and they had gone through the migration. We had guided them. They combined the migration away from Windows file servers and OneDrive, because they were using both, which were obviously not in sync with each other. So they had two different data silos. And we consolidated the data of their on-premises file servers with their cloud file repository into one repository in the Ignite platform. So they had to get a little bit used to the new way of working. But what is great about Ignite is that you can still have people access the data through a drive letter. So a network drive, a mapped drive with a drive letter, is something that many people are familiar with. It has been around for a very long time. So it feels like it's a very natural way of reaching your data in the cloud. It feels like it's on your local network. So the story here is that they called us, and it was fairly urgent to them, because they had lost or misplaced a folder with data that they needed for their operations department, which runs 24/7. These guys never catch a break. They are a rail cargo company, so they are switched on 24/7 always. Turns out that we were able to track back the origin of the disappearing of this data. What caused it was the CEO himself had accidentally dragged a folder into a different folder where it didn't belong. And we were able to give them the location of their data within minutes. We ran a report in the Ignite web portal. The report comes out, and then we could show them black on white, as we say where I'm from. We could show them exactly what had happened, which action was responsible for the data moving somewhere else, and most interestingly, who was actually responsible for the action. So as soon as they found out that it was the CEO himself, then there was no more issue. We didn't hear back on this
That was
issue
the end of that
anymore.
conversation.
I guess it was a little sensitive. Yeah.
Oh my, yes, indeed. But that leads to the myth, right? That's why they think that, okay, wait, no, it's not. It can't possibly be safe because it's in the cloud, like you said. Can't see it, touch it, feel it. Then it can't be. So next myth. So long as I back up that data, then I'm safe.
Yeah, that is the general idea. That is the general best practice. You have to back up your data, obviously. I mean, the amount of paranoia a person or a company has when it comes to their data will define, in my experience as an IT consultant, how many backups that this company will make of its data, where they will store them, how many versions they would like to keep, and so on. So there is, first of all, redundancy for the Ignite storage platform, which means that that data doesn't just live in one data center, it lives in 3 different data centers. Right. Now, if that's not enough peace of mind for you, you still retain full ownership of your data. And all you need to do, if you want a copy, a physical copy on your own hardware, is you just need to set it up so that you actually have a download, have a copy of that data on your own media, whether it's a USB hard drive or it's a server, or if you want to download the data in real time and have it replicated across multiple company locations. All of that is very much feasible and very relatively easy to do. At least for IT people, it's quite straightforward to set up, and it's just a matter of deciding how many copies would you like and where would you like to have them stored.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, I mean, that because of the redundancy that already exists within Ignite, that's not necessary. But for additional peace of mind, if that's what people want to do, then certainly it is doable. All right. So on the next one, you can't effectively protect the data without making it hard for people to work. This is a myth that I've heard so many times, that if it's locked down so tight, then what happens is people wind up resorting to their own devices and working outside the system that's supposed to be protected.
Yeah, which we would define as a shadow IT, right? Which is something that every IT department has to fight on a daily basis. In some companies that I've worked for, it's worse than in others. A lot has to do with how good the solution is that the company's IT department provides to the company's end users. So when you are in a situation where IT really does not have a good solution that meets the needs of the end users, you will always have more shadow IT things going on, which means that people will put the data in places where they're not supposed to. They will upload them to their own personal accounts in the cloud for different cloud services that they might be subscribed to. So this poses real dangers from many different aspects, talking about confidentiality, talking about governance, compliance. But again, like we mentioned before, different versions will start to float around. Data will be residing in cloud platforms or media that that data is not supposed to be in at all. It's actually quite the opposite. It is actually way easier to protect your data effectively when you are using a CDE like Ignite. It is an enabler more than it is going to restrict your end users. So, for instance, at the start of the COVID pandemic, since the offices in the Middle East, they were a little bit ahead of the head office of Artsen when it came to the implementation of Ignite, simply because they were the first set of users, about 100 users, that we had shifted over a couple months before. So they were already quite used to working with the product. All their files were in the Ignite CDE. So they were able to pivot overnight. They could all work from home. Nobody needed VPN. everybody already had access. Everybody already had the app on their phone. Everybody already had the app on their laptop computers. So the rest of the company needed to shift VPN license around because there were not enough VPN licenses. We had to set up new terminal servers because we had literally 400 people that needed to be able to work from home overnight. So it was way easier to send everybody home with their laptops in the Middle East because they were already completely rolled out and completely integrated onto the Ignite platform. And lastly, we had a lot of requests coming from the end users to, hey, can you give me access to this folder? Can you share this with that guy? Now we have forklifted that burden. I'm trying to say this in a positive way, do not get me wrong. We have shifted the task of attributing access rights to people to the business unit managers. So every team or every department has the power to give or revoke access up to a certain level. They are not administrators, but they can decide who has access to their data because they are the data owners. So instead of IT having to seek manager approval when IT receives a request from an end user, IT does not know if this end user is actually entitled to access this data, yes or no. So we would always have to seek approval if the end user did not get that approval yet, which creates a lead time for the end user to be able to access the data, right? So if the user's boss or responsible manager can actually give access and take access away with 2 or 3 clicks, that dramatically improves the delay in between the requests being launched and the person actually accessing and working with that data.
Wow, so that actually segues beautifully into the perceived ROI, because you were talking about people being able to do their own permissioning. So one of the myths here is that the CDE won't actually reduce the support tickets; it'll just shift it to other support issues. But you just dispelled that myth by saying that, when you could put a little bit more power into the business unit manager's hands in granting permissions or breaking waterfall permissions. But there are also other examples of that, correct?
Absolutely. I just want to clarify, I'm not advocating some sort of free-for-all situation where you have zero governance or IT doesn't keep track of who has permissions for what folder, etc. anymore. No. What I mean is you empower your business to be able to, since the data owner is responsible for the governance of a certain folder, they should be able to quickly hand out access to that data themselves. And this can be combined with a more classical approach of where you would work with security groups in an Active Directory environment, which is a very common thing in the enterprise IT world. You can actually do both. So Ignite was one of the very few solutions that we found that offers that capability of integrating your existing security tree, if you want, your set of security groups, the way that your access rights are currently being governed, they can be laid over, forklifted to the Ignite platform, and they can be combined with new permissions where business can, like I said, give user so-and-so access to folder this and that, which is what breaking waterfall permissions would be like. That would be one example of that, where business would ask us all the time, hey, I want this guy to access that subfolder and that subfolder only of this project, which is a nightmare to govern in the Windows file server world. It becomes very complex and it becomes very non-transparent when you start doing that stuff. So a lot of our users wanted that capability, and with Ignite we can do both. So we can stick to our classic rights allocation scheme, where by default you will get automatically access through an Active Directory group, and on top of that, if there is a subfolder somewhere, you can also get access just to that subfolder. And when you navigate to that subfolder, you will only see that subfolder and the content of that subfolder.
Okay. Brings us to our next myth on the CDE cost and ROI is that our current NAS devices are just fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, it kind of depends on how you look at it, I guess. It is, the biggest drawback of a NAS device is that it's so easy to pick up and take away, and then your valuable files are also gone with the device. Right. There are obviously ways of having multiple devices in sync and making offsite backups, etc. But real-time synchronization between NAS devices is a myth that has been advertised for many years by many NAS suppliers, many vendors of those devices, and we've tested all of them. We've used most of them, and we were actually using them in the past. To be very specific, we had a setup of multiple NAS devices in place where we couldn't or did not want to deploy Windows file servers because of cost reasons and because of reliability issues with power provided by generators, etc. But it just didn't work. They would always end up not synchronizing and would always have issues there. So the moment we switched over to Ignite, we had a bunch of NAS devices that were no longer in use. So what we did is we just leveraged that existing hardware to make our local download backup that I mentioned earlier. We just aggregated them as a big pool of storage, and we created a backup job to synchronize everything from the Ignite Cloud on a daily basis. So you don't have to download everything all over again. You can just download whatever changes have happened, like only the differences would be downloaded and stored. To have this extra ownership, if you want, over your own data, so that you have your own data again on your own device that you can physically pick up and store away in a vault if you want to, or you might need to access it at some point. You never know. Other NAS devices were simply repurposed as backend storage for the hybrid deployment of Ignite. So without being too technical, if you are going back to the scenario I mentioned earlier where you have a site office with 10, 20 or more users and you have bad internet connection there, you can set up a server in that site office, have it handle all the uploads and downloads to the Ignite Cloud, serve your users, your local computers in your local network in those containers directly without them having to go over the internet line. And then it is perfectly fine to use an existing NAS as a backend storage solution to have that Ignite local cloud repository running there. So you can definitely repurpose existing hardware to use in hybrid scenarios.
Exactly. And that's why I moved ahead on the bullets, because it was essentially, you just answered that a lot of people think that cloud means that they're going to be losing all their investments in their existing storage hardware. Obviously, that's not the case. There's so many ways, great, productive, creative ways of repurposing that hardware as you've just described. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so that was our last slide. So this obviously was a very successful endeavor for Vincent and Artson Group ultimately, where at least there are the three main goals that Vincent had and was able to meet it in terms of data silos and reducing the maintenance cost and combating that shadow IT that we just talked about. So all of that was extremely helpful. And Vincent, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. This was great.
Great. Well, thanks very much to Carol and Vincent. That was really, really interesting. We've got a few minutes left for some questions. If anyone out there wants to ask a question, now is your opportunity. But first of all, I've got a question really for Vincent. So how long did it take you to switch to Ignite, and what sort of learning curve was involved for you and the team?
Well, a lot depends on the amount of users that you have and how complex your existing data structure actually is, how many files you have, etc. But in smaller type of deployments or deployments that you can chop up in smaller stages or multiple phases, you can start making headway pretty quickly. Once you familiarized yourself as an IT department or IT person with the technology, I would say that it's realistic to stage your first migration in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks.
And I mean, what about, I mean, all your employees? I mean, do you have to implement a sort of training program for everybody?
It definitely will enhance their experience if you take a coordinated approach towards your end users, like you suggest, with a training program. What we did at Artsen is at first we introduced the technology under the bonnet. We chose for a stealth approach so that the end users would not even notice that the data had been shifted to Ignite. As a first step to migrate all the data into the Ignite platform. And then in a second iteration, we would actually train them in smaller groups and show them what new functionality that they had gained since.
I see. And I mean, were there any culture changes used at all?
The biggest culture change would be a good one. The one I talked about earlier being the fact that you no longer have to run every permission request by IT. If the business owner, the data owner is in power and can give access, can hand out access rights within their department or within the business, that dramatically enhances the experience for the users.
I see. No, that I can see that's a real benefit actually. So I mean, if you're looking at bids, can you incorporate time limits in a bid submission folder?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I can take that one. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. You can. The simple answer on that one is yes. So when you are sending out an upload link, this is referring to the accessibility slide, I guess, that we were discussing earlier. And so when you're sending out an upload link, you can actually set time limits as to when it expires. You can even set a number of times that the item can actually be click. Let's say if you're sending out a download link, then there are a number of different restrictions, if you will, that you can incorporate when you are creating a bid submission folder. So yes, absolutely, you can put an expiry date on it.
And I mean, and can you sort of automate certain tasks? I mean, could you, for example, get the system to send out reminders for people to complete their bids?
Well, I guess it would be a different, you can send out invitations. For example, if you're creating a standard user, then yeah, you can create like an invitation, and I believe that it does send out a reminder for them to join that particular folder. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, another question is probably for you again, Carol, maybe Vincent, you'd like to chip in on this one, but is it possible to control which users in a supply chain can access or submit documents?
Well, I can address it from a generic standpoint, but you might be more interested in hearing Vincent's take on it in terms of dealing with standard users and power users. Vincent, did you want to take this, or?
Sure. Ignite offers two different types of user licenses, the power user or the standard user license. This translates mostly to a power user being an internal employee or somebody that's close to the company, that's closely collaborating with the company, and a standard user being more of an external user, more of an outside person. Nevertheless, both people can do very similar things, especially when it comes to using mobile access. So with the mobile application, standard users can access data in Ignite just exactly the same way a power user can. So what we can, for instance, do now at Arts, what we couldn't do before, is when we are working on a bid, when we're working on a project, when we're preparing a bid, it doesn't really matter whether it's pre-tender or during the execution phase, actually. You're always collaborating with people inside and outside your company, right? So you want some people outside to be able to do some things, like maybe see the PDF versions of the construction drawings, but then you only want your internal employees to be able to edit the actual AutoCAD or Vectorworks or whatever program you might be using, like the actual drawing files themselves. You could say, yeah, that's just an access permission setting. That is correct. On the other hand, when you want to make sure that people are always able to access the latest version of the drawing, it can really help to just tell people that I see a lot of site supervisors, for instance, run around with tablets, iPads, and such these days, that, hey, here's a mobile application. You can log on with your own email address from your own company, and yet you are still able to transparently be invited into our file repository, and you, as owner of that file repository, have full control what these outside people or externally attached people can and cannot do, and can or cannot view.
Great, well, thank you. Well, I think we're probably pretty well out of time, actually. So I think probably good time to sort of wrap this up. So I'd just like to say thanks very much indeed to Carol and Vincent for sharing your experiences, and also to Ignite for sponsoring today's event. And for anyone who wants to see this again, the webinar will be available to download on demand. So thanks to everybody for listening.